The massive alien fleet materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system, like a nightmare coming to life. One moment the void was empty, the next it was filled with hundreds of dark, menacing ships that seemed to absorb the light of distant stars. Commander Park Jin-woo gripped the railing of his command bridge, watching the sensor displays light up with warnings that made his blood run cold. "Sir, we're reading over 300 vessels," reported Technical Officer Lee Sung-min, his voice barely steady. "Each one is easily 10 times the size of our largest battleship." Jin-woo nodded grimly. The Earth Defense Fleet consisted of 47 ships, most of them barely a decade old. Against this armada, they might as well be throwing rocks at a hurricane. But something deep in his chest, something that had kept him alive through 12 years of military service, told him there was more to this story than simple conquest. Lieutenant Kim So-ra looked up from her communication station, her face pale. "Sir, incoming transmission on all frequencies. It's not friendly." The main screen flickered to life, showing not the face of an alien commander, but a series of geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. When the voice came, it seemed to speak from everywhere at once, translated by their computers into perfect Korean. "Primitive species of the third planet from your star. You have been selected for absorption into the collective. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to surrender your world completely. Compliance ensures your survival as a servant species. Resistance ensures total extinction. This message will not be repeated." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jin-woo could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Around him, his crew stared at their instruments with the hollow eyes of people who had just received their death sentence. "Commander," whispered Navigation Officer Cho Hye-jin, "our long-range scanners are picking up something else. There are debris fields around some of the outer planets. Old ones, really old." Jin-woo turned to study the tactical display. Ancient wreckage, twisted metal that didn't match any known Earth technology, scattered across the asteroid belt, like the bones of some long-dead civilization. How long had it been there? How had they never noticed it before? "Sir," So-ra called. Out, her voice stronger now. "What are your orders?" Every tactical manual, every wargame simulation, every piece of military training Jin-woo had ever received told him the same thing. Negotiate, buy time, evacuate what civilians they could, and hope for a miracle. The smart play was to at least try to communicate, to understand what these invaders wanted beyond simple conquest. But as he looked at those alien ships, their hull designs like nothing he'd ever seen, something else stirred in his mind. A memory from his grandfather, who had fought in the wars decades ago. "Sometimes, Jin-woo," the old man had said, "the only way to face a bully is to show them you're not afraid, even when you should be." "Open a channel," Jin-woo commanded, his voice cutting through the bridge's nervous silence. So-ra's fingers froze over her console. "Sir?" "You heard me. Broadcast on all frequencies. Make sure every ship in that fleet receives this message." The lieutenant's training took over, and her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency. "Channel open, sir. Broadcasting now." Jin-woo straightened his shoulders and looked directly into the camera that would carry his words across. The void to the waiting alien armada. When he spoke, his voice was steady, calm, and carried the weight of 7 billion human souls behind it. "Unknown fleet, this is Commander Park Jin-woo of Earth Defense Command. You've made a mistake coming here. You talk about absorption and extinction like you're offering us a choice between two kinds of death. But you're wrong about us. You're wrong about this planet. You have 24 hours to turn your ships around and leave our system. This is your only warning." The bridge fell into absolute silence. Even the usual hum of the station's systems seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Through the viewport, the alien fleet continued its slow but relentless approach toward Earth, their dark ships moving like predators closing in on wounded prey. "Sir," So-ra whispered, "they're not responding." "They will," Jin-woo replied, though. He wasn't sure why he felt so certain. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in places human archaeologists had been studying for centuries without truly understanding, something was beginning to stir. Ancient mechanisms, older than human civilization, were slowly awakening from their long slumber. The aliens had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Jin Woo had given them 24 to leave. In the cosmic game of chess that was about to unfold, both sides had just made their opening moves. The question now was which species would be left standing when the final move was played. In space, the alien fleet pressed forward, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had no idea they were flying toward the one planet in the galaxy that had been waiting for them to arrive. Dr. Lee Min-ho's footsteps echoed through the sterile corridors of the Seoul Research Facility like gunshots in the night. His heart hammered against his ribs as he clutched his tablet, the screen displaying readings that should have been impossible. 20 years of archaeological research, 20 years of studying ancient sites that everyone assumed were just old stone monuments. And now everything was changing right before his eyes. The elevator seemed to take forever. Min-ho watched the numbers climb while checking his tablet again and again, making sure he wasn't seeing things. The energy signatures were real. They were massive, and they were coming from sites all over the planet that had been dormant for thousands of years. Come on, he muttered, pressing the elevator button repeatedly as if that would make it move faster. Above ground, he knew the alien fleet was still approaching Earth, their massive ships getting closer every hour. But down here, 60 meters below Seoul, something incredible was happening. The doors finally opened and Min-ho sprinted down the final corridor toward the communications center. Scientists and technicians scattered out of his way as he barreled. Past them, his lab coat flapping behind him like wings. Commander Park. He burst through the doors, nearly tripping over his own feet. The sights, they're all activating. Commander Jin Woo turned away from the wall of tactical displays where he'd been studying the approaching alien fleet. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, but when he saw Min-ho's expression, something changed in his eyes. What sights, Doctor? Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, Newgrange, every major archaeological site on Earth is showing massive energy signatures. Min-ho's words tumbled over each other in his excitement. Commander, they're not ancient monuments, they never were. They're something else entirely. Jin Woo stared at him for a moment, then turned to technical specialist Cho Hye-jin. Confirm what he's saying. I want satellite feeds from every location he just mentioned. Hye-jin's fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up feeds from observation satellites positioned around the globe. What they saw made everyone in the room fall silent. At Stonehenge, the ancient stone circle was glowing with a soft blue light. That pulsed like a heartbeat. Deep beneath the ground, geometric patterns were becoming visible through some kind of scanning technology that the satellites had never been equipped with before. The patterns stretched for miles underground, forming a complex network of interconnected lines and nodes. Look at this, Hye-jin whispered, switching to the feed from Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza was lit up like a Christmas tree, with energy, flowing through channels carved into its stone blocks, in patterns that definitely weren't part of the original construction. At least not the construction that human archaeologists had always assumed was original. The satellite feed from Cambodia showed Angkor Wat surrounded by a web of light that extended deep into the jungle, connecting to smaller temples that tourists visited every day without realizing they were part of a vast network. In Peru, Machu Picchu was glowing so brightly that the satellite's cameras had to adjust their exposure to avoid being overwhelmed. My God, breathed Dr. Kim Tae-young, the facility's chief archaeologist, who had quietly entered the room during the commotion. We've been studying these sites for centuries and we never realized what? Jin Woo demanded. Min-ho pulled up a three-dimensional map on his tablet and projected it onto the main screen. Look at the pattern, Commander. Every major archaeological site on Earth, when you connect them, forms a perfect geometric network. It's not random. It was designed. The map showed lines of energy crisscrossing the planet like a web, connecting ancient sites across continents and oceans. The pattern was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, clearly the work of an intelligence far beyond anything humans had achieved. But designed by who? Jin Woo asked the question everyone was thinking. Before anyone could answer, Hye-jin looked up from her console, her face pale with shock. Sir, the alien fleet has detected the energy spikes. Their ships they're changing formation. On the tactical display, the approaching alien vessels were spreading out into a wider formation, no longer moving in the tight formation they'd maintained since entering the solar system. Some of the ships had even slowed down. They're scared, Jinwoo realized. Whatever these sites are, whatever they're doing, the aliens recognize it. Through the vast emptiness of space, aboard the flagship of the invasion fleet, Commander Zethkara studied the energy readings from the primitive planet with growing unease. The species they'd come to conquer was supposed to be barely beyond the Stone Age according to their intelligence reports. They should have been throwing crude missiles and nuclear weapons at the fleet by now, not activating technology that registered. On sensors as older than their own civilization. Analysis, Zethkara commanded his science officer. The energy patterns match no known technology in our databases, Commander. But the quantum signatures, they're similar to readings we've detected from dead worlds in the Outer Rim. Worlds that were abandoned long before our species achieved spaceflight. Zethkara's multiple eyes narrowed as he stared at the blue-green planet ahead of them. Are you suggesting this primitive world has access to precursor technology? I'm suggesting, Commander, that this world might not be as primitive as we assumed. Back on Earth, Minho was frantically checking readings from sites around the world. Commander, whatever's happening, it's accelerating. The energy output is doubling every few minutes. At this rate what? Jinwoo pressed. At this rate, these sites are going to have enough power to... Well, I don't know what they're going to do. But it's going to be big. Through the facility's speakers, an alarm began to sound. Not the sharp, urgent tone of a battle alert, but something deeper, more rhythmic. It sounded almost like music, if music could be made from the heartbeat of the Earth itself. Sir, Hyejin called out, I'm getting reports from our monitoring stations. People near the archaeological sites are saying they can feel something, a vibration in the ground, in the air. Some are reporting that they can hear singing. Jinwoo walked to the window that looked out over Seoul's skyline. In the distance, barely visible through the city's glow, he could see a faint light rising from the direction of several ancient burial sites that dotted the hills around the capital. Sites that Korean archaeologists had been studying for decades, without ever suspecting they were part of something much larger. Dr. Lee, he said quietly, how long do you think we have before whatever's happening happens? Minho checked his readings one more time. Based on the rate of increase, Commander, I'd say about 18 hours. Jinwoo nodded slowly. The aliens had given Earth 72 hours to surrender. He'd given them 24 hours to leave. But it seemed like the planet itself was working on a much tighter schedule. The first wave of alien ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. Captain Yang Subin gripped the controls of her F-35 fighter jet, leading a squadron of 12 pilots in what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. The alien vessels were each the size of city blocks, their dark metal surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to shift and move when you looked at them directly. Dragon Squadron, this is Dragon 1, Subin spoke into her helmet microphone, trying to keep her voice steady. Remember, we're not here to win. We're here to buy time for the evacuation ships. Through her cockpit window, she could see the massive alien craft moving with impossible grace for something so large. Their weapons hadn't fired yet, but energy was building along strange ridges that ran the length of their hulls like glowing veins. Then something impossible happened. The Pacific Ocean, thousands of meters below the descending alien fleet, began to move. Not waves or currents, but the ocean floor itself. Water erupted skyward in massive geysers as something enormous broke through the seafloor with the force of a volcanic eruption. What the hell? Subin's wingman, Lieutenant Park Jun-ho, never finished his sentence. Massive structures rose from the ocean depths like mechanical mountains being born. They were easily as large as the alien ships, but their design was completely different. Where the alien vessels were sleek and predatory, these structures were geometric and crystalline, their surfaces covered in symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Command, are you seeing this? Subin called through her radio, pulling her fighter into a steep climb to avoid the towers of water cascading from the rising structures. We're seeing it, Captain. Commander Jinwoo's voice crackled through the comm system, barely audible over the roar of displaced ocean. All pilots, maintain distance from the structures. We don't know what they are or what they're capable of. But Subin was already close enough to see details that made her mind struggle to process what she was witnessing. The structures weren't just rising from the ocean. They were unfolding, like flowers made of metal and crystal, and something that wasn't quite either. Their surfaces split open along seams that revealed interiors filled with light that hurt to look at directly. The alien ships, which had been descending in perfect formation just moments before, suddenly found themselves surrounded by walls of energy that appeared from nowhere. Subin watched through her fighter's targeting system as one of the alien vessels fired what looked like a plasma cannon at the nearest structure. The beam of superheated energy struck the crystalline surface and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not reflected, but held in place like it was trapped in invisible amber. "Dragon 1, my instruments are going crazy," reported Lieutenant Kim Min-seo from Dragon 3. "The structures are generating some kind of field that's interfering with our electronics." Subin checked her own readings and felt her blood turn cold. According to her instruments, the structures weren't just interfering with electronics. They were bending space itself around them. Her radar was showing distances that couldn't possibly be correct, angles that didn't make sense in three-dimensional space. One of the alien ships, a smaller scout vessel, tried to break away from the formation and escape back to space. It accelerated toward the upper atmosphere, its engines leaving a trail of exotic particles that glowed purple against the blue sky. But as it approached what should have been the edge of the energy field surrounding the structures, something incredible happened. The ship didn't break through the field. Instead, it appeared to curve back on itself, following the contours of space that had been twisted into impossible shapes. Subin watched in amazement as the scout ship emerged from the opposite side of the field, traveling in exactly the opposite direction from where it had been heading. "Command," she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "The structures are trapping the alien ships using some kind of spatial distortion. They can't escape." Back at Seoul Command, Dr. Lee Min-ho was frantically analyzing data streaming in from observation satellites and military sensors around the globe. What he was seeing defied every law of physics he'd studied in 20 years of academic work. "Commander Park," he called out, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. "The structures aren't just rising from the ocean. They're appearing at every major archaeological site on Earth simultaneously. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat. They're all transforming." Jinwoo looked at the global display showing energy signatures erupting from ancient sites across every continent. "Transforming into what?" "Defense systems," Min-ho said, his voice barely audible. "The previous inhabitants, whoever built these sites, they left Earth prepared for this exact scenario. We were never alone, Commander. We were chosen." High above the Pacific, Captain Subin watched as the alien fleet found themselves completely surrounded by structures that operated on principles her mind couldn't grasp. The alien weapons fired again and again, but their energy beams were caught and held by barriers made of twisted space-time itself. Their ships tried to maneuver, but found themselves trapped in corridors of bent reality that led nowhere. "Dragon Squadron," she announced to her pilots, "I think we can head home. Looks like Earth can take care of itself." Through the comm system, she could hear similar reports coming in from military units around the world. Russian pilots over Siberia reported ancient stone circles rising from the tundra and generating energy shields. Australian forces near Uluru watched as the massive rock formation split open to reveal technology that looked like it belonged in a dream. Egyptian pilots flew over pyramids that were no longer made of stone, but of some kind of crystalline material that pulsed with its own light. The alien fleet, which had come to Earth expecting to face primitive rockets and nuclear weapons, found themselves trapped by technology that had been waiting for them for millions of years. Their communications filled with panic as ship after ship reported systems failing, weapons unable to lock onto targets that existed in more dimensions than their sensors could process. Above the planet, the remaining alien ships in orbit began to receive desperate transmissions from their advance force. The messages were confused, terrified reports of impossible geometry and weapons that shouldn't exist. The orbital commanders stared at their displays in growing horror as they realized the truth. They hadn't come to conquer a primitive world. They had walked into a trap that had been set before their species had even evolved. A trap built by beings who had foreseen this exact moment and prepared for it with patience that spanned geological ages. Earth wasn't just humanity's home. It was a fortress, and it had just awakened from its long sleep. General Vextar of the Hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominator, watching his carefully planned invasion fall apart like paper in a storm. The massive view screen showed his fleet scattered across Earth's orbital space, with nearly half his ships trapped in energy fields that his science officers couldn't even begin to explain. "Sir, the Ravager reports their weapons are completely offline," his communications officer announced, her voice trembling. "They're saying their targeting computers can't lock onto the structures because they exist in 11 dimensions." Vextar's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. In 30 years of conquest, he had crushed 17 different civilizations, enslaved billions of beings, and never once encountered resistance like this. The humans should have been easy prey, a young species barely out of their home system, wielding primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. "Status of the advance force?" he demanded. "Trapped, sir. The Annihilator and Death's Edge are caught in some kind of spatial loop. They've been trying to break free for the past hour, but every time they think they're escaping, they end up back where they started." Down on Earth's surface, Major Kim Tae-hyung stood before one of the awakened structures near Seoul, his bare hand pressed against its crystalline surface. The moment his skin made contact with the alien material, his world exploded with information. But it wasn't words or images flooding his mind. It was pure understanding, knowledge that bypassed his ears and eyes and spoke directly to his consciousness. He saw the history of the galaxy stretching back millions of years, watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on an ocean, and through it all, he saw the architects. They were tall, graceful beings, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to be made of living light. They had ruled this arm of the galaxy for eons, not through conquest, but through protection. They had built mighty fortresses on worlds throughout space, creating a network of defenses against the dark things that lurked in the void between stars. But even the architects had their limits. A great catastrophe had befallen them, something so terrible that they had chosen to sacrifice themselves rather than let it spread. Before their extinction, they had prepared their greatest fortress world, hiding it in plain sight and waiting for the right species to inherit their legacy. "Commander Park," Tae-hyung spoke into his radio, his voice steady despite the incredible weight of what he'd learned. "Earth isn't just our home. It's a fortress. The architects built it to protect this entire region of space from cosmic threats. They've been waiting millions of years for someone worthy to take over their mission." In the command center in Seoul, Commander Jin Woo felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying we were chosen?" "I'm saying we were tested," Tae-hyung replied. "Every major event in human history, every leap forward in our development, it was all part of a test to see if we were ready to become the galaxy's guardians." Jin Woo looked around at his crew, seeing the same mixture of awe and terror on their faces that he felt in his own heart. Then he turned to the communications console. "Open a channel to the alien fleet. All frequencies." Lieutenant Kim So-ra's fingers moved across her controls. "Channel open, sir." Jin Woo straightened his shoulders and spoke with the authority of 7 billion humans behind him. "General Vextar of the Hegemony. Yes, we know who you are. We know about the 17 worlds you've conquered, the billions you've enslaved, the children you've torn from their families to serve in your labor camps. This is your final chance to withdraw." The reply came quickly, filled with rage and disbelief. "You dare speak to me of conquest, primitive? You think your ancient toys can stop the might of the hegemony? I have crushed entire star systems." "Look around your fleet, General," Jin Woo said quietly, his voice carrying across the void to every ship in the alien armada. "Look at the debris, field near our moon. Count the wrecks of every other empire that thought Earth was defenseless. Then ask yourself, do you really want to be the next addition to our graveyard?" For the first time since the conversation began, silence fell over the alien comm channel. General Vextar turned to his tactical officer. "Scan the moon's orbital space, full spectrum analysis." What his sensors revealed made his blood turn cold in his veins. Scattered around Earth's satellite were thousands upon thousands of ship hulls, some so old they had become nothing more than twisted metal drifting in the void. But others were newer, their designs recognizable from the hegemony's own intelligence files. "Sir," his science officer whispered, "I'm reading wreckage from the Korth Empire, the Stellar Confederacy, the Machine Collective. These are all civilizations that disappeared centuries ago. We always assumed they had destroyed each other, but they all came here," Vextar finished, understanding dawning in his alien mind. "They all made the same mistake I'm making now." The view screen shifted to show one particular piece of wreckage that made Vextar's heart skip a beat. It was the distinctive hull design of a hegemony dreadnought, but not from his fleet. This ship was older, covered in the corrosion of decades, in space. "When?" he demanded. His communications officer checked her records. "Sir, the Eternal Conquest disappeared 43 years ago while investigating this system. We assumed it was lost to a stellar anomaly." Through the bridge's speakers, Commander Jin Woo's voice continued, calm and implacable. "Your predecessors were given the same choice you're being given now, General. Leave peacefully, or join the collection of those who chose poorly. The architects left us more than just weapons. They left us patience. We don't want to destroy you, but we will if you force our hand." On Earth's surface, Major Tai Hyung was still connected to the architect structure, feeling the vast intelligence that slumbered within it. Through the network, he could sense similar structures awakening all over the planet. The Great Pyramid was no longer made of stone, but of some impossible material that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Stonehenge had become a gateway to folded space that could transport matter across vast distances instantly. Machu Picchu was generating a gravitational field that could crack planets in half. "Commander," he reported, "the structures are giving me tactical information about the alien fleet. Their ships are powered by quantum reactors that have a critical vulnerability. If we wanted to, we could disable their entire fleet without firing a shot." Jin Woo nodded, then spoke once more to the alien general. "General Vextar, you have 1 hour to make your decision. Withdraw your fleet and never return to this system, and you'll be allowed to leave with your ships and crews intact. Try to continue your attack, and you'll discover why this system has remained unconquered for millions of years." In the silence that followed, both species waited to see which path the future would take. The final confrontation began, not with the roar of weapons or the flash of explosions, but with a moment of absolute silence that seemed to stretch across the entire solar system. General Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching through the massive view screen as more architect structures continued to rise from Earth's oceans and continents like ancient gods awakening from eternal sleep. Each new structure that emerged was different from the last. Some looked like crystalline spires that twisted impossible directions through space. Others resembled geometric flowers made of living metal that bloomed with lights that didn't belong to any spectrum his sensors could identify. The alien geometries were literally rewriting the fabric of space-time around Earth, turning the blue planet into something that existed in dimensions his mind couldn't fully grasp. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Our navigation computers are showing retreat paths that still exist, but the window is closing rapidly. Whatever those structures are doing to local space, soon we won't be able to jump to hyperspace at all." Vextar's second-in-command, a veteran warrior who had stood beside him through the conquest of 12 worlds, leaned close and whispered urgently, "General, perhaps we should reconsider. The humans have shown us technology beyond anything in our databases. This isn't a battle we can win with conventional tactics." For a moment, Vextar hesitated. In his long career of conquest, he had learned to recognize when retreat was the wiser choice. But as he looked at the primitive blue world that had dared to challenge the might of the hegemony, pride, the fatal flaw that had destroyed more conquerors than all the weapons in the galaxy, made the decision for him. "All ships," he commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet's communication network. "Full assault formation. Concentrate all firepower on the largest structures. Show these primitives the price of defiance against the hegemony." The order rippled through his fleet like wildfire. Massive dreadnoughts began charging their primary weapons, while smaller attack craft swarmed forward in attack formations that had crushed the defenses of 17 different worlds. Energy readings spiked across the alien armada as hundreds of ships prepared to unleash destruction on a scale that could crack continents. On Earth's surface, in the command center deep beneath Seoul, Commander Park Jin-woo felt the weight of humanity's new responsibility settle on his shoulders, like a mantle woven from starlight itself. Through the neural connection he now shared with the Architect network, he could sense every human being on the planet, all 7 billion souls suddenly linked to technology that had been old when dinosaurs walked the Earth. The connection was overwhelming at first. He could feel the fear of civilians in evacuation shelters, the determination of soldiers manning defensive positions, the awe of scientists watching impossible structures rise from sites they had studied their entire lives. But beneath it all he felt something else, a quiet strength, a unity of purpose that spoke to the best of what humanity could become. "Dr. Lee," Jin-woo said quietly, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to unleash. "Initiate the final protocol." Dr. Lee Min-ho looked up from his console, his face pale but resolved. "Sir, you understand what that means. The final protocol won't just destroy their fleet. It will mark the hegemony for total elimination across the galaxy. Every world they control, every ship they've built, every outpost they've established, will be targeted by defense networks throughout this spiral arm." Jin-woo nodded slowly. "They made their choice when they decided to ignore our warning. Now, we make ours." The Architect weapon that activated wasn't like anything from human science fiction. There were no energy beams lancing across space, no explosions that lit up the void. Instead, it was pure information, a quantum signal that propagated instantly across the galaxy, at speeds that made light seem to crawl. The signal carried a simple message, but one that would reshape the balance of power throughout known space. The hegemony had attacked Earth, the ancient fortress world of the Architects, and Earth had responded according to protocols established millions of years ago. Within minutes, the effects began to ripple outward from Earth like stones thrown into a cosmic pond. On hegemony worlds, throughout the spiral arm, automated defense systems left behind by long-dead civilizations suddenly activated. Ancient satellites hidden in asteroid fields powered up for the first time in millennia. Dormant weapons platforms orbiting forgotten stars came online with targeting solutions that had been calculated eons ago. The hegemony's vast empire, built on conquest and maintained through fear, began to crumble as the galaxy's immune system activated against them. Above Earth, the immediate effects were even more dramatic. Half of Vextar's fleet immediately powered down their weapons and began broadcasting surrender signals, their crews finally understanding that they were facing forces beyond their comprehension. These ships hung motionless in space, their hulls displaying symbols of submission that the Architect network translated and accepted. But the other half of the fleet, driven by desperation and the fear that surrender would only lead to slower death, pressed their attack. Their weapons fired in coordinated volleys that should have been capable of shattering moons. Instead, the energy beams were caught by the Architect defenses and turned back on their sources. Plasma cannons found their own fire redirected through folded space to strike their own ships. Kinetic projectiles were trapped in loops of twisted time that sent them careening back toward the vessels that had fired them. It was like watching an army attack its own reflection in a mirror that fought back with their own weapons. General Vextar watched in horror as ship after ship in his fleet was destroyed by its own firepower, turned against itself by defenses that operated on principles his science couldn't begin to understand. The Annihilator, his most powerful dreadnought, fired its main gun at one of the ocean-borne structures, only to watch the beam curve through impossible angles and punch through its own bridge. "All ships retreat," he finally screamed into his communicator. "Emergency hyperspace jump now." The surviving ships of his fleet, barely a third of the armada that had arrived so confidently just days before, engaged their faster-than-light drives and fled into the depths of space, leaving behind the wreckage of the greatest military disaster in hegemony history. As the last enemy ship vanished into hyperspace, Commander Jin Woo stood before the great architect interface that had grown from the floor of the Seoul Command Center like a tree made of living crystal. His hand glowed with ancient symbols as the network stretched his consciousness across the solar system, showing him the vast machinery of protection that Earth had always been, hidden beneath the surface of an ordinary world until the moment it was needed. Lieutenant Kim So-ra approached hesitantly, her tablet displaying communication logs that were updating faster than she could read them. "Sir, we're receiving incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Hundreds of them. They're requesting permission to establish diplomatic relations with Earth." Jin Woo smiled, feeling the weight of humanity's new role settling into something manageable, something worthy of the trust the architects had placed in them millions of years ago. Humanity had just graduated from a protected species to the galaxy's newest guardians, inheritors of a responsibility that spanned star systems and would last for ages to come. The next time invaders came to Earth, and they would come drawn by curiosity or greed, or the simple desire to test themselves against the legendary fortress world, they too would receive the same chance that General Vextar had been given. One chance to turn back. One chance to choose wisdom over conquest. One chance to leave with their lives and their ships intact, because that was what Guardians did. They protected, they warned. And when warnings were ignored, they acted with the full force of ancient justice that had kept this corner of the galaxy safe since before humans had learned to make fire. The Earth turned quietly in its orbit, looking peaceful and blue and ordinary to any casual observer, but now everyone in the galaxy knew the truth. This was no ordinary world, and its people were no ordinary species. They were the Guardians now, and the galaxy was a safer place because of it. The end.